contacts with put a permanent end to the war in the Middle East. Let's take a listen to President Putin's aide in this regard.
Putin considers Donald Trump's decision to extend the ceasefire to be the right one, as it should provide a chance for negotiations to stabilize the situation. At the same time, the Russian preparation to the inevitably dire consequences, not only for Iran and its neighbors, but the international community, should the United States and Israel once again military action. And of course, the option of a ground operation on Iranian territory is seen as completely unacceptable and dangerous.
Well, of course, Ushakov, President Putin's aide, definitely will be in contact with the Iranian representative of the Persian Gulf neutral states and Israel, and in order to find a practical solution to get out of the war, which is now going on in the Middle East, of course, after the implementation of the ceasefire, relative peace in the Middle East, but trying to stop the war for good. Now, meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump, when asked which one of the wars would finish first, the war or the Iran war, he said that both wars have similar. Well, this phone conversation between President Putin and American counterpart Donald Trump came just 2 days after Mr. Abbas arrived in Russia for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who praised the Iranian resistance to independence actually during the Israeli war on Iran. According to Iran's foreign minister Abbas Russia said that talks with President Putin and Russian officials as part of consultations within the two sides, and that would be a great and good opportunity to discuss the latest developments in the region, and definitely talks with President Putin would have high and special to Iranians. During a meeting, President Putin, of course, the meeting was held in Petersburg. The meeting, President Putin said that Moscow will do everything possible and in its power to serve the interests of the Iranian people as well as the people of the Middle East. Shows that Moscow is trying all its power to avert and prevent another escalation in the region. Well, now with the war, the U.S.-Israeli war, continue for 2 months, so with a fragile ceasefire in place now, still shipments through Strait of Hormuz have been disrupted, and this has impacted global energy supplies. Now, there is a sticking point still between the two sides. Iran says so long as the U.S. naval blockade of Iran imports continues, there would be no negotiations. And at the same time, the Americans are the U.S. naval blockade of Iran imports is a bargaining chip in the hands of the Americans with Tehran. So we have to wait and see what comes out of such war rhetoric between the two sides.
The state since 2021 a swift rebuttal, claiming the charges violate.
I categorically and reject the accusations made against it by the Southern Federal Prosecutor's Office. It's part of a perverse strategy to violate, specifically the national sovereignty advocated by Article 40 of the Political Constitution of the United Mexican States.
Judges allege that Roca is the notorious Sinaloa cartel in distributing drugs in exchange for bribes and political support. Roca, a member of Mexico's governing political party, Morena, and a political ally of the Since coming to office, Claudia Sheinbaum has led a campaign against cartels within Mexico, but this has concentrated on criminal kingpins rather than corrupt political and security officials. Mexico's foreign ministry was saying that the country's internal authorities would decide the validity of which it said currently lack evidence, a message repeated by the Mexican Attorney General's office.
Tradition will only be granted if it's established that the evidence is sufficient under the legislation of the requested party. In this case, our country, Mexico.
Combating illegal drug trafficking administration, although indicting a sitting foreign official removed from the U.S. Justice Department. The Sinaloa cartel was designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. in February 2025, action which widens U.S. legal authority to act against the group.
If the region destabilizes further, we can say these events are directly linked, but the direction is clear. Closer ties with and more independence from OPEC, and those moves are highly beneficial for Washington.
Abu Dhabi's departure from OPEC may signal that the cohesion of OPEC is splintering, and its power may be lessening, and there may be a freer market ahead.
A freer market means countries acting alone. Of course, that's a problem for an organization built on coordination, but the U.S. has been after this goal for some time.
OPEC and OPEC nations are, as usual, ripping off the rest of the world. And I don't like it. Nobody should like it.
And any weakening of OPEC's power to define global oil markets serves U.S. economic and geopolitical interests, because Washington benefits much more from a market that allows greater energy independence, which in turn includes diplomatic leverage. If we look back, we realize that OPEC was actually created to counter Western control of oil. A small group of companies, known as the Seven Sisters, once dominated the entire market. But OPEC changed that by acting as one. In 1973, it proved how powerful that unity could be.
The resulting oil embargo and drastic and unwarranted oil price increases caused severe problems of recession as well as inflation. The embargo did more than create long lines at gasoline filling stations and increase the price of fuel or expose our dependence on foreign suppliers for petroleum. As much as any single factor, it contributed to the most serious economic recession in 4 decades.
That embargo showed what coordinated action could do. Today, that coordination is fading. Qatar left. Angola and others have stepped back too. And now the UAE, a major producer deeply tied to global finance, is doing the same. Relations with the US and Israel seem to be at the forefront of Abu Dhabi's agenda, more important than a unified approach. And so, if the old order is crumbling and OPEC is no longer acting as one, Washington is very likely to jump into the role it has played for so long.
For the unprovoked war on Iran. During the hearing in Congress, he was asked to explain what exactly the U.S. has achieved with billions of taxpayers' dollars already spent.
Secretary Hegseth, you have been lying to the American public about this war from day one. The president has got himself and America stuck in the quagmire of another war in the Middle East.
Don't say I support the troops on one hand and then a 2-month mission is a quagmire. That's a false equivalation. Who are you cheering for here? Who are you pulling for?
You can say a lot of things about the strategy, but calling it realistic? And in fact, starting wars in the Middle East that get out of control and lead us to have far greater costs for the benefits is one of the cornerstones of the unrealistic strategy that this administration has criticized over and over and over again.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was testifying before the House Armed Services Committee. Now, the topic of the hearings was to be the upcoming year and fiscal policy, military spending by the U.S. Department of War. However, questions about the conflict with Iran dominated the proceedings on Capitol Hill. One tough moment involved the issue of the nuclear facilities and Iran's alleged nuclear aspirations, which were the basis of the conflict. Pete Hegseth seemed to speak out of both sides of his mouth and give unclear answers about what Iran's actual capabilities and aspirations were and what had been destroyed by the United States. This is one
Congressional committee. They haven't yet. Haven't gotten their all of the...
Well, their nuclear facilities have been operated underground, they're buried, and watching 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material...
Reclaiming my time, we're watching a second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely
They
obliterated?
had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of...
So Operation Midnight
The
Hammer
weakest
accomplished nothing of substance. It
You're
left us
missing-
at
you're
exactly
missing
the
the
same
point.
place we were before. So much so
Their
that we had to
facilities
start
were
a
bombed
war.
and obliterated. Their ambitions continued, and they're building a conventional
All
shield.
right, let me try again.
Now, the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's blockade of the strait in light of the unprovoked U.S. attack has caused a lot of problems on the global economy. U.S. and global energy markets are in a tailspin. That came up in the congressional proceedings as well, and we had a member of Congress almost mocking the way Donald Trump seems to have blockaded Iran's blockade. This was an exchange regarding that issue.
How is this war going? Do you think we're winning?
Militarily on the battlefield, it's been an astounding military success.
No, but are we winning the war?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you call Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz winning?
Well, I would say the blockade that we hold that doesn't allow anything to come in or out of Iranian ports.
Okay, so we blockaded their blockade. So they blockaded us, and then we blockaded their blockade. That's like saying, tag, you're it. Or, you know, if President Madison had said, well, the British just burned down Washington, but don't worry, we're going to burn it down as well.
Now, the tragic death at the all-girls school in Manab was something that came up, and Pete Hegseth couldn't give clear answers about how much money was spent in the strikes that ultimately took the lives of well over 100 innocent schoolgirls in the early moments of the U.S.-provoked war.
How much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike to the Iranian school where kids were killed? You have that number? In terms of the missiles we used? As I've said, that unfortunate situation remains under investigation. You don't know how much it costs, but I wouldn't tie a cost to that to anything.
There were also tough questions from members of Congress about the deaths of U.S. servicemen in a recent drone attack and whether or not action was taken to adequately protect members of the U.S. armed forces that are engaged in the conflict.
So let's be clear, no counter-drone capabilities, no counter-rocket systems, no counter-mortar or counter-artillery, not even the basic overhead protection that you and I had 20 years ago in Iraq, and now 6 of our soldiers are dead. The next day, you downplayed the attack. You said it was a squirter that squeaked through fortified defenses. But since then, thankfully, brave survivors have come forward to set the record straight. So are you saying that these soldiers, our soldiers, who survived this horrific attack are lying?
For the commencement of the conflict, we put in maximum defensive posture we could.
The direct
We moved
what
70,
they said.
in this directing, can I speak, or are you just going to monologue falsehoods all over the place?
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of
Reclaiming
the
my
based
time.
on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Now, Pete Hegseth used his remarks to try and make the case for Donald Trump's call to increase U.S. military spending. The United States already has the largest military budget in the world, but Trump wants to increase it by roughly 50%, up to $1.5 trillion. Now, Pete Hegseth faced off with members of Congress who hit him with tough questions, and it's unclear as to whether or not the Congressional Committee and the American people, many of whom watched the proceedings on television, would be convinced that such a dramatic increase in U.S. military spending was necessary. But it was certainly a dramatic day on Capitol Hill, with the U.S. Secretary of War answering questions about an unpopular war that the American people continue to oppose in all the polls that come out.
Jewish faction This is a political organization that represents ultra-Orthodox Jews here in Israel, a group of religious groups that have for many years been able to avoid the draft to join the IDF to provide military service in Israel. However, that all changed back in 2024 when the Supreme Court here in Israel decided that those who are evading the military draft should be told that they can no longer have access to welfare benefits and in some cases should face jail. Now, in the last few days, a Yeshiva student, so this is an ultra-Orthodox Jewish student who goes to a religious institute where they study the Torah, the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh as well, was arrested for not turning up for his recruitment to the IDF. And as a result of that, on Tuesday evening, a group of ultra-Orthodox Jews of an aide, 5 arrests were made. They were charged with attacking the police officers. They were also charged with trespass and causing criminal damage. And as a result of those arrests and also the arrest of the Yeshiva student earlier this week, there was a call by the Jerusalem faction for this mass mobilization against the military draft. Now, the government is aware of how complicated this situation is, and in fact, Netanyahu's government is proposing a new law that would give that exemption back to the ultra-Orthodox community. But so far, it has not managed to be completely finished. It's not managed to be passed. And until that, this community here in Israel that represents around 12% of the population are saying that they will continue to come out in force, these protests of rage, and they will do everything to ensure the government and Israel knows that they do not want to join the IDF.
I Yerusalemu abari mu ba Orthodox bakaba bari kwigaragambya kubera ko bashaka gushyirwa mu ngabo za IDF cyangwa Israel Defense Force, akaba ari ingabo z'igisirikare cya Israel. Bakaba rero bari kwigaragambya mu mujyi wa Jerusalem bamenyesha leta ya Israel ndetse na Benjamin Netanyahu ko batagomba kwinjira mu gisirikare cya IDF cyangwa Israel Defense Force. Naho Peter Hegseth we mu nama aho yari ari imbere ya Kongere ya Leta Zunze Ubumwe za Amerika ari kubazwa ku byerekeye umutungo ingabo ndetse n'igisirikare cya Israel cya Leta Zunze Ubumwe za Amerika kiri gukoresha muri iyi ntambara, yagiye arya indimi ndetse abura n'ibisobanuro kuko yaje kubazwa nk'amafaranga yakoreshejwe kuri za misile zarashe abakobwa b'abanyeshuri bari mu nama, ati ni angahe iriya misiyo yatwaye kugira ngo mubashe kwica bari abanyeshuri bari mu ishuri. Akomeza no kubazwa ati ko hari abanyamerika bapfuye kubera ubwirinzi butabashije gukora, ati ibintu twari dufite byarindaga ikirere mu myaka ishize ubu ngubu bimaze gushira.
Main groups, the Al-Qaeda-linked Janim, as well as the FLA groups, they are trying to hit multiple parts of the country at the same time to spread the army thin. But the latest official word from the Africa Corps is that they're not just holding the line, they are pushing back. They are calling out the information war being run by Western media, who they say are exaggerating these groups' gains to cause some sort of panic and make the government look weak. if you do look at the actual facts on the ground, the story seems to be way different from what you might hear in the Western media. In the towns of Sebabagu, the Malian army successfully fought off a major Janim attack. We also saw the photos and the videos of the aftermath, and it's quite clear that the joint work between Mali's troops as well as Russian specialists is paying off. You also have the city of Menaka, another group there.
African Corps akaba ari ingabo zishamikiye ku Burusiya ziri muri Mali, zikaba zivuga ko zishinja imitwe yihurije hamwe yashatse gukora kudeta cyangwa guhirika ubutegetsi ko yahombye cyangwa byapfuye ubusa, ariko zikaba zikomeza no gutangaza ko aba bateroriste, abo bihurije hamwe babita abateroriste, ko bari kugerageza kongera kwisuganya kugira ngo bagaruke bongere bagabe ibitero. Kandi bakaguma iyi Russian African Corps bakaba bavuga ko bagomeza gushinja ibinyamakuru byo mu burasirazuba bwo hagati bwo ni mu Burayi ko bikabya ku byabaye muri Mali, kubera ko ibinyamakuru byo mu burasirazuba bwo hagati byavuze ko ingabo z'Uburusiya cyangwa aba bashingiye ku Burusiya batsinzwe, bityo bakirukanka bagasubira inyuma kubera aba bihurije hamwe baje guhirika ubutegetsi muri Mali i Bamako.
The mission for the Africa Corps as well as the Malian armed forces hasn't changed. They are continuing to track and destroy these targets, and as they say on the ground, the one who dares wins. It is a tough fight, but the partnership is clearly the strongest defense Mali has right now.
Bakomeza bakubwira ko kandi imikoranire hagati ya Africa Corps, Russia Africa Corps ndetse n'ingabo za Mali, ati umubano wazo ndetse n'imikoranire hagati y'ingabo za Mali ndetse na Africa Corps uri kugenda neza, ko ibinyamakuru byo mu burasirazuba bwo hagati ndetse n'iby'Uburayi bikabya.
Its coastline, the Caspian must remain a zone of peace and cooperation, and certainly the strike by the anti-Iranian coalition on March 18 against the infrastructure of the Anzali seaport, which serves the trade and logistics interests of all 5 Caspian coastal states, was an impermissible and unacceptable blow. We have spoken in favor of overcoming the crisis in the Persian Gulf region and the Middle East as a whole as soon as possible, through achieving political agreements between all parties involved. Speaking of the Middle East, we of course consider it important not to lose sight of what is happening in Lebanon, and especially the deadlock that has emerged from which there is no apparent way out regarding the creation of a Palestinian state.
Sergei Lavrov, umuvugizi w'igihugu cy'Uburusiya, agaruka ku ntambara iri kuba muri Iran ndetse n'ibiri kuba muri Liban, avuga ko bakomeje gucungira hafi nk'igihugu cy'Uburusiya ibiri kubera muri Liban ndetse no muri muri Iran. Bavuga ko bazagerageza nk'igihugu cy'Uburusiya kugira ngo barebe ko intambara igomeje kubabaza ndetse no guhungabanya ubukungu bw'isi yahagarara.
Today's discussions surrounded areas of investment, energy, trade. In fact, Russia remains one of the biggest investors in Kazakhstan's economy today. Now, a major project.
And so, have misled the public about why we are at war. You and the President have offered ever-changing reasons for this war.
Democrats are also criticizing the exorbitant cost of this conflict. The Pentagon released its very first official estimate on Wednesday, $25 billion, mainly spent on purchasing ammunition.
The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats.
Hegseth insists the conflict is not a quagmire, but it's unclear where the discussions are heading. Donald Trump is rejecting Iran's proposal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for a lift of the US blockade and postpone nuclear discussions until a later date. The US president also said that he held a phone call with Russia's President Putin over the war with Iran. Putin offered to help the US handle Iran's enriched uranium as part of a potential nuclear deal without giving further details.
He told me he'd like to be involved with the enrichment if he can help us get it. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They know it, and just about everybody else does. And so we talked about that a little bit. He doesn't see them have a nuclear weapon either.
In the absence of negotiations, Iran's foreign minister has been trying to drum up support for his country. He conducted phone calls with various officials in Lebanon, India, Poland and Kenya, along with the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Israel's military chief has vowed during a visit to South Lebanon to strike Hezbollah targets north of the Litani River, beyond the so-called Yamamai. Lieutenant General Ayal Zamir said any threat anywhere against our communities or our forces, including beyond the yellow line, will be eliminated. At the same time, Donald Trump says he's told the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that Israel should only take surgical military action in Lebanon and avoid a full resumption of the war.
IDF igisirikare cya Israel kikaba kimaze kwica abantu 20 mu gihugu cya Liban nubwo bari mu gahenge. Ndetse umukuru w'ingabo z'igisirikare cya IDF akaba avuga ko yahaye uburenganzira abasirikare ba IDF kurasa muri Liban ikintu cyose babona giteye impungenge. Ibi bikaba bikomeje kuba mu gihe hagati ya Liban ndetse na Israel bari mu gihe cy'agahenge ngo katangajwe na perezida wa Leta Zunze Ubumwe za Amerika Donald Trump. Donald Trump we akaba avuga ko yahamagaye Vladimir Putin, baravugana. Vladimir Putin kandi akaba yamubwiye ko ashaka gufasha kugira ngo intambara irangire, bityo afashe Amerika kubona uranium kuva muri Iran.
Bringing almost 2/3 of Gazan territory under Israeli control.
64% of Gaza now is excluded and totally under direct Israeli occupation. They want to put as many Palestinians as possible in the smallest area in order to drive them out.
The Israeli military has said that the area between the two lines is restricted to enable aid delivery and that civilians will not be affected. But at least 3 Palestinians working with foreign aid groups have been killed by Israeli assaults in the area since mid-March. Living there are fearful they will also be attacked.
We used to dream of going forward. Now we are being pushed back, and even in our surroundings, we're not able to move since shelling has become intense, like during the war. The war is not over.
The expansion.
Igisirikare cya Israel kandi kikaba gikomeje no gusunikira abaturage bo muri Gaza kure y'imbibi za Israel. Naho bavuga ko ubu ngubu igice kinini cya Gaza, agace ko muri Palestine, kimaze kwigarurirwa na Israel. Naho kandi Israel imaze kwica abantu 175 bagiye mu butabazi muri Gaza. Ndetse Israel ikaba yafashe yataye muri yombi abantu 20 bari bagiye bajyanye ubufasha muri Gaza. Abaturage bo muri Gaza bo bakaba bavuga kuti intambara ntabwo yarangiye, twari dufite icyizere ko ibintu bishobora kurangira tugakomeza ubuzima tugana imbere, ati ariko ahubwo kugira ngo tujye imbere bari kuguma badusunika badukura ku butaka bwacu. Israel yo ikaba yahakanye ibirego Ukraine yatanze ko Israel yaguze ingano zibwe ku butaka bwa Ukraine zigurishijwe n'Uburusiya.
Some breaking news, which is that the scandal has exploded so quickly that the company, the Israeli wheat importer, that ordered this stolen wheat. There's no question that it is stolen Ukrainian wheat. The Russians simply claim that it was taken legitimately from land that they have captured from Ukraine. But it is, under international law, stolen Ukrainian wheat. That company is now refusing to take possession of the wheat in the massive ship that has brought it to Israel. So we're beginning to see at least this Israeli firm respond to the possible repercussions of what clearly seem to be your...
Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Israel of accepting Russia-stolen grain. Ukraine-Israel spat over grain shipment. Ni ukuvuga ngo Volodymyr Zelensky ari gushinja Israel kugura ingano ndetse n'ibiribwa byibwe ku butaka bwibwe igihugu cya Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky rero akaba ari gushinja Israel kugura ibyibano kubera ko ibyo bihingwa byari byaratewe ku butaka ubu ngubu Uburusiya bwigaruriye mu gihugu cya Ukraine. Palestinian Red Cross says Israel army kills 10 of. Israel says it has intercepted 575 Gaza Frontline activists on 20. News update and headlines. Tuareg rebels vote to conquer countries north after attack. Donald Trump says the U.S. may reduce troop member in Germany. U.S. Fed keeps interest rates steady for third straight meeting. News update and headlines. United States. U.S. Fed flags high level of uncertainty for Middle East war. U.S. Fed Jerome Powell says will take success at his word on maintaining independence. U.S. Fed Chief Powell plans to stay on as low-profile central bank governor. United States. Trump brushed Powell staying on Fed board, say nobody wants him. Trump says has a shot at crewed moon landing before end of his presidency. U.S. House approves outline for an additional $70 billion for immigration. Sohlan Mamani calls of Britain's King Charles III to return diamond to India. U.S. judge governor of Mexican state of Sinaloa with drug trafficking.
Artist group Jenin, who are allies of the Tuareg separatists, announced a blockade on all roads leading into Bamako, saying no one will be allowed to enter the capital.
Perezida, thank you for your time. Those were the news update today on the 30th of April 2026. Donald Trump akaba avuga ko agiye kugabanya ingabo za Leta Zunze Ubumwe za Amerika mu gihugu cy'Ubudage nyuma yo guterana amagambo na chancelier w'Ubudage. Akoze kubana nanjye niwe kandi subscribe ibitekerezo cyangwa inyunganizi wanyandikira muri comment urakoze ugira ibihe byiza.